Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Horror Analysis with me, Drew. You caught me. I false started the first video. I started coughing on water as it went down the wrong way. I'm still tearing up. Oh, my goodness, but we're okay. Today we're continuing with History of Horror, and we are back to the beginning of the, well, not even this century, the last century. The 1900 to 1914 is the section we're talking about today. This is a really weird section. This is a really weird time period. Films in general started in 1890s. By 1900, they were barely getting to the, not even to feature full-length rate yet. Obviously, we're still in the silent era. The first... In 1911, we get to the first full-length horror movie. I'm not sure what the first full-length movie in general was. But, movies are still in their infancy, very much so. And when we're talking about movies, and when I'm doing research about movies, things are getting weird. Whoops. There we go. It's a bit better adjusted now. Like one of the directors on the list today, was record-setting because it's a she, first off, which is cool anyway, having a female director on this early in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Having a female director is pretty cool. The record that she broke is for having the first movie over the minute mark. That is really weird to me and to pretty much everybody else I've talked to about this. I guess if you're studying old film or something, I guess it's sort of, of course it has to be, someone has to break the minute mark. And there's a threshold that I didn't even realize was there. Almost all of these are in the public domain, or they're lost to the sands of time. So you can find them and watch them on YouTube or on Wikisource or a number of other sites that I found where these are available. And getting these very odd directors. Very odd directors. George Millet. I'm probably slaughtering his name. George Millet. I'm going to go with that anyway. We'll be going over him in the early ones. Very strange guy. He's the first guy to use fade-ins, fade to blacks, fade from blacks, and what was the other one? I don't know. Stop motion animation was one of his things. The female director was the first one to film things backwards and have the film be played forwards if it's filmed backwards, or vice versa. Which was, of course, used famously in Carrie, the movie Carrie, the final scene where the girl is walking along the road in the dream sequence type thing, and the hand. But she was walking backwards, and they filmed it backwards. That's why it's so. That's what's giving you. Your eye sees that it's disjointed, and it gives you the weird things. This is a technique that dates back to 19-something. 1900 or 1809-something. Yeah. It's crazy. When we're going this far back, it's pretty nuts. But anyway, let's talk about what movies are actually going on during this time, or what films, I guess. You're still getting some pretty famous directors that people will know of. In 1914, I'm going to go backwards from 1914 to 1900. Oh, before I do that, let me put this up. It's the same slide, essentially. I just retitled it. As last time, the lists are the same. I'm essentially using the second to last one and the last one pretty extensively, or pretty exclusively, I suppose. For this, for my information, I'm also going on to IMDb and, of course, going on to Wikisource and YouTube to watch the movies. But you can find most of these, the second to last one and the last one. And of course, I'm really impressed with this www.angelfire.com/darkside/realm of horror /history1.htm. It was a very helpful site for me, so I'm going to recommend it. So, for 1914, two movies that came out. The Ghostbreaker. In the first year of Cecil B. DeMille's career, he directed the Ghostbreaker. Also in that year, let's get rid of that. Also in that year, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, which was a Poe story. So they're still, as soon as they're getting the chance to make the movies of Poe stories, they're doing it. 1913, there's three that are of note. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It was 26 minutes long. It's in the public domain and it is available. I'm trying to think of what the guy's name was. King something. Yeah. An 18-minute long, the first filmed werewolf movie called The Werewolf. Unfortunately, that one was lost in a fire, in the studio fire, so that one is not available to anybody. But, supposedly it was the first werewolf movie on film. Also in 1913, we talked about it before, The Student of Prague. In one of my Vision. It's a doppelganger movie. The reflection comes out of the mirror
and goes and commits crimes while the student is stuck with being blamed for them.
1911, the first full-length horror movie, the 71-minute Dante Inferno. Now, this one is available on YouTube, and I did watch over it. It's kind of cool. Special effects, I mean, they're not, Industrial Light and Magic or anything, but got a bug in here. But special effects are pretty cool for the time. For 1911, I was pretty impressed. It's based on Dante Alighieri's Inferno from the Divine Comedy. Obviously, it's about Dante and Virgil, the Roman poet, going through hell. Virgil escorting Dante through hell. There's a lot of, in all these, there's going to be a lot of overacting. Just because there's no subtlety, it's all silent movies, so there's a lot of gesticulating, over-gesticulating. So it's going to happen that a little bit of overacting, but the special effects, there's someone, people dressed as birds, and they had the birds fly up to the tree, on top of a tree, which is cool. I was like, wow, that's neat. I was like, I'm not sure if it's wire work or what happened, but it was cool. I'm sure it's a very simple explanation. It probably doesn't involve wires, but it was good nonetheless. It was well done. 1910, we have the first version of Frankenstein on film. This is the one I've mentioned before that was done by Edison, produced by Edison. It's 16 minutes long. Yeah, and it was produced by Thomas Edison. 1909, going back to 1909, you have a movie called The Sealed Room, which was Poe-esque, sort of a Cask of Amontillado story, directed by D.W. Griffith, who was famous for directing Birth of a Nation, one of the most famous silent films ever. So it's weird to see that so many of the biggest names in directing started in horror, or began within the first couple of movies, did horror movies. It's cool to see. It gives justification for horror fans. Oh yeah, jumping back to 1905, we have this female director that I was mentioning before. She did a movie called Esmeralda. Her name was Alice Guy, or Alice Guy, if it's French, since it probably is. It is definitely French, but I'm not sure if that's how it's pronounced. Alice Guy. I'm going to go with that one anyway. Esmeralda was the name of the movie. It was a 10-minute long version of Hunchback of Notre Dame. Notre Dame. She's the one that, of course, broke the minute mark on movies several years before this, of course. And then going back to 1903, Georges... how did I decide I'm going to say this guy's name? Méliès? M-E-I-L-E-S. May? I'm going to go with May. It sounds right. I'm not great at French names. It's Georges with an S. His movie called The Monster. He has a lot. He has well, they're all very short movies as well during that time, but he was doing a lot of movies. Doing some research on him, and of course Alice Guy. He was a magician, and he started playing with film work. He did stop motion animation. He's going to be in the 1890 section, which I still haven't decided how I'm going to break that up. He will be the first horror movies. He did the first horror movie, The Haunted Castle or something along those lines. House of the Devil. And he has about 6 others in this in that section from 1899 backwards. But all these firsts seem to be coming out of horror, or people who are doing horror as well. Not that necessarily Hunchback of Notre Dame is horror, but it's creepy, depending on the makeup and stuff. So it's interesting to see that all these groundbreaking... The first broken ground was done in horror films. The first film edit was for a death scene, That's 1895's Execution of Mary Queen of Scots, which was 30 seconds. And the edit was a man dressed as a woman, puts his head on the chopping block. The executioner raises his axe. The film cuts. They put a dummy in. The axe guy puts his axe down and chops off the dummy's head. So sort of and that was 30-second execution of Mary Queen of Scots. And that was the first edit, and it was for a death scene, um, which is kind of weird. See all these the first film things, and all the seems to be a driving force. Horror is a driving force in making film industry better, which is kind of cool for horror fans out there. It's kind of justification. So I'm going to go on. That was 1903. George Millet, maybe it was Millet. I'm going to pronounce it wrong. Pronounce it differently each time, just to confuse everybody. George Millet has a lot of ones during this time. I just picked some that were usually on this list as well. And not even all of them that were on this list, and certainly not all of them that he did, because he has hundreds of films under his belt as director, and usually star too. He usually played at least one of the characters, unless it wanted to be a sexy woman, which he did a little bit of too. He was the character. Let's see. So we're going to go to Shill. We're going to go to Lovecraft. I'm getting a little crazy about Lovecraft in a good and a bad way. I was thinking he was way more in chronological order than he actually is, so I had to go back and struggle for a bit. But it's all good. There's going to be a few tweaks from last time that I'm just going to go over and add additions to it. I'm going to go with start with the Modern Masters. Lovecraft is considering the Modern Masters from what they're doing from 1900 to 1914. He has the Modern Masters of Arthur Machen, Algernon Blackwood, Lord Dunsany, Edward Plunkett, and Montague Rhodes James. Now I didn't have the page numbers, so I have the page numbers on this one. I don't on this. That's why, so if you need the page numbers for Shill, they're these. So Arthur Machen, in this section, he's going to have essentially, white people. White people I haven't listened to yet. I do have it on my phone, waiting to be listened to. Hopefully I will get to it. During this time also, I think he did The Bowman, which isn't horror, but it is one that I listened to over the weekend. And it was pretty good, actually. It was basically World War I, the British in the trenches. They're about to be overrun by German troops, but St. George and his archers from Agincourt come down and start sniping the Germans with bows and arrows. And they sort of see spectral, and people see spectral bowmen along the way, and they don't know how all these German troops are being felled. Weird fiction, I would suppose, but not necessarily horrific fiction. There's no sense of cosmic dread, as Lovecraft would call it. There's no sense of threat. From the British point of view, and since it's told from the British point of view, we identify with the British, not the Germans. If you are German, you may identify more with the Germans, but if you're reading it or listening to it, you identify with the narrator, who is from the English point of view. So, white people is... what was it? How was it described? Let's see. Diary notes of a little girl whose nurse has introduced her to some of the forbidden magic and soul-blasting traditions of the noxious witch cult. The cult whose worshipped lore was handed down long lines of peasantry through Western Europe. Um, revolting orgies of the witches' Sabbath in the Welsh hills. It's a calmly disquieting chronicle, according to Lovecraft. God, this is why we have Lovecraft around. Calmly disquieting chronicle. So fancy. So let's go on to Algernon Blackwood, which I know a little bit more of. I've read John Silence's stories. I really recommend John Silence's stories. It's essentially, to oversimplify, which I'm prone to do, and I think it's useful, so I'm not going to stop. But it is oversimplification, fair warning. It's like a Sherlock Holmes type character with ghosts and supernatural stuff going on. The John Silence is a paranormal investigator in today's parlance. What did he call it? He called it physician extraordinary. John Silence. Lovecraft tends. What's the term he uses? He doesn't like the mystery side of things. He says it's marred only by traces of popular and conventional detective story atmosphere. I actually think it's a cool idea to have, to have the supernatural and the natural mix. I think it's a good blend, but it's marring in Lovecraft's eyes. So agree to disagree on that one. That's fine. Lovecraft also mentions the empty house and other stories from 1906. Actually, he mentions the Willows. I think I picked up the empty house and other stories in 1906 from Wikipedia. He mentions the Willows from 1907, which was probably anthologized after the fact. But I don't have any idea when. Dropping down to Lord Dunsany, we get into his big ones as well. Algernon Blackwood's big ones and Lord Dunsany's big ones. Arthur Machen, we're still going to jump back a little bit further with him. Lord Dunsany, Time in the Gods, probably his most famous, 1906. Lovecraft also talks about the Book of Wonder from 1912. And 5 plays. Come on, Drew. I missed an S there. Because Lovecraft talks about Gods of the Mountains, and that's 1914. I think I've listened to Time in the Gods, and I think it was just a really bad recording, so I didn't pick up a lot of it. I listened to some of Dunsany's shorter stuff, but not enough to draw steady conclusions on it. I know that S.T. Joshi, who of course we've talked about plenty, as Lovecraft's biographer, is also Dunsany's biographer. And of course Neil Gaiman, who I respect as a great author nowadays, really likes Dunsany as well. Basis of some of his stories, heavily influenced by Dunsany. So that's, high praise indeed. I usually like recommending LibriVox, and I certainly will for some of these. I think the Time in the Gods version, there may be more than one by now, but the Time in the Gods version that I listened to wasn't great. buyer beware, but it's free, so not really buyer beware either. M.R. James, his two big ones, Ghost Stories of an Antiquary. I keep wanting to say Antiquity. Of an Antiquary is 1904, and More Ghost Stories is 1911. There was a third volume, which was we talked about in the 15th section, 1916 or something. And of course, you could find all many of his short stories on LibriVox or online at Gutenberg, etc. So that's the modern masters. Where am I jumping from here? Yeah. Now we're going to go to Weird Tradition in the British Isles. This is his next chapter back. Chapter 10 is Modern Masters. Chapter 9 is Weird Tradition in the British Isles. Chapter 8 is Weird Tradition in the U.S. Chapter 7 is Poe. And Chapter 6 I thought would be prior to Poe. It's not necessarily. It's stuff from Europe, regular Europe. The continent. Spectral literature on the continent. But we're going to start with Chapter 9 and work our way backwards, because it's not that it's chronological, just in the order I have it. Now, Matthew Phipps' Shield, one of the ones really recommended by Lovecraft, is House of Sounds from 1911. Hot water. Bram Stoker, of course, famous for Dracula. We'll get to it next time because it's in the 1890s. But he died in 1912. He wrote Jewel of the Seven Stars in 1903, which was... What did Lovecraft say about that? He mentioned both of these, I believe. Strange Egyptian Resurrection. Yeah, touching on a strange Egyptian resurrection is less crudely oh goodness gracious, I can't talk today. Less crudely written than Lair of the White Room. Blah blah. Mouth. Is less crudely written than The Lair of the White Worm. 1911. Yes. Which had to deal with a gigantic primitive entity that lurks in a vault beneath an ancient castle. And as Lovecraft says, utterly ruins a magnificent idea by a development almost infantile. Gotta love it, Lovecraft. So that's Bram Stoker. He is best known, of course, for Dracula. His other works do tend to pale by comparison. I think I own both of these books, but I haven't read them yet. Maybe I'll see if I can get them on audio. That'd be cool. Sax Rohmer, The Mysterious Fu Manchu, 1913, is of this period. This is one that's we've seen in the horror movie section several times, in several sequels. And Sax Rohmer did the books versions for 30-something years of sequels to Fu Manchu. Brood of the Witch Queen was one that Lovecraft wants to talk about. I forgot to mention it last time. It's from 1918, so it's not really of this time. But Brood of the Witch Queen is one that I should have talked about, but it slipped through the cracks. E.F. Benson, we believe we talked about last time? Yes, we did, briefly. For some of his short stories collections. The Man Who Went Too Far was from 1904. Is one that Lovecraft really was really recommending. See if I can get what his. Let's see. Breathes the man who went too far breathes whisperingly of a house at the edge of a dark wood, and of Pan's hoof mark on the breast of a dead man. Pretty cool stuff. I think actually I've heard about this in other places. I don't know where though. E.M. Forster's Celestial Omnibus. I think I probably mentioned at one point. Forster is not known for his weird fiction. And apparently this one had been... I read an article today online when I was looking up these things. This book had been out of print, essentially, since it was published. And it was only recently put back into print by one of these, some college press, because of shill, because of Lovecraft talking about it. I don't think he's even very positive about it. It's sort of whimsical, but you get a glimpse of Pan and a glimpse of fright, or of fright, in the Celestial Omnibus. William Hope Hodgson, his most famous one's probably The House on the Borderland. I think I talked about this earlier. I think this was part of my discussion on complex discovery plot. Maybe I can find it. It's certainly his most famous work. D. No, I think I'm getting it confused with something else. I've been doing that more and more lately, unfortunately. I need a couple of days rest. Keep my brain back in check. But other than House on the Borderland, Ghost Pirates is 1909. Another one that Lovecraft's going to be mentioning in here. Jumping on to American Tales, we get into one of my favorites, Ambrose Bierce. Ambrose Bierce is fantastic. One from this time, a lot from earlier. His most famous would be Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, which would be 1890s, and we'll talk about that next time because it's horror. It's weird. It's weird fiction. I think Lovecraft makes a point of saying Bierce is essentially only a horror writer besides his non-fiction. The Stranger, 1909. This is a really good story, and it's a really good audiobook at LibriVox if you wanted to check it out. The Devil's Dictionary, there should be an apostrophe there. Come on, Drew. 1911. Not a horror book, but it is a very interesting book. It's a dictionary that gives very snarky, enjoyable definitions to words. Let's see. Love is a madness shared by two people, curable by marriage. I think that was one of the more famous ones. I'm misquoting it, I'm sure. But I wanted to mention it. It's cool to check out. F. Marion Crawford. Now, F. Marion Crawford was pretty cool cat. The one Lovecraft wants to talk about is The Wandering Ghost. Apparently, he also wrote the first, fiction book on the Mafia. We're talking 1908, which is kind of cool. I think it was actually called Corleone, which is, if anybody's read or seen The Godfather, Michael Corleone is the main character. Or, Vito Corleone, I suppose, is the father. But Michael is the main character for most of the book, anyway. Nope, wrong button. So, yeah, F. Marion Crawford wrote some ghost stories, but he also wrote the first mafia story, which was, I found, very, very cool little factoid. Did I have Lafcadio Hearn? I didn't. Oh, let me jump back. I did forget one on British Isles. It's one I wanted to sort of talk about. Lafcadio Hearn. I've been actually listening to Lafcadio Hearn. There's a lot of it on LibriVox. He sort of translated Japanese folklore of horror tales into English, called the Kwaidan in 1903. And he did a few versions of this and other folklore of Japan, because he lives in Japan. He was an Irish author. And he's translated a lot of these ghost stories, and they're pretty cool ghost stories. I basically want to leave this for the section on horror anthropology. And I'm not sure, as of the date I'm recording this video, I'm still toying with the idea of making the horror anthropology not the next section, but the previous section. So you may already know all about Lafcadio Hearn, because I might have done a whole video on him, which would be surreal. But he's a British. He would have been in the British Isles because he is Irishman. Yeah, so I'm doing a lot of notes on Japanese horror at this time because I'm listening to a lot of Lafcadio Hearn, and it's cool stuff. I recommend it. Oh, it's Lafcadio. Lafcadio, and then Hearn is Hearn. Kwaidan is Qwaidan. Good stuff. Recommend it. I'm going to jump back to Weird Tradition US now. Robert W. Chambers, In Search of the Unknown. This is not the most famous one, I'm thinking, for him. Robert W. Chambers. Oh no, we're going to talk about more about Robert W. Chambers next time. 1890s, his most famous one came out. So we're going to skip it for now, but pardon me. Yes. Gotcha. Nope, I didn't get you. Bugs still flying around. Sorry, guys. And finally, Robert W. Chambers' Search of the Unknown is 1904. Irving S. Cobb, Fishhead from 1911. We talked last time about Irving S. Cobb. What was it? Irving S. Cobb. Here's my notes from last time. Unbroken Chain was sort of a model for Lovecraft's Rats in the Walls, according to Wikipedia. I'm not sure what S.T. Joshi would have to say about this. He'd be the expert. I haven't read the Irving S. Cobb ones, but I'm really going to go out of my way to now. Fishhead, according to Wikipedia again, I'm not sure if it's just a really big Cobb fan, saying that Lovecraft's ripping him off or something. But according to Wikipedia, Fishhead from 1911 was basis for the Shadows over Innsmouth, by Lovecraft. Now, Lovecraft does talk about both of those, I believe. Double check. I mean, there's stuff that Lovecraft adopts, but Lovecraft's very... what's the word? Lovecraft's very humble in saying, oh, these are my Dunsany works and these are my Poe works, but where are my Lovecraft works? Lovecraft, made everything his own. It's like saying that, Carrie from Stephen King is a darker version of Stranger in a Strange Land by Robert Heinlein. You can say that, but King made Carrie his own. You don't think, Michael Valentine Smith when you're reading Carrie or watching Carrie as a movie. Or, as I've mentioned before, the 1632 versus Ring of Fire, trapping a town in another time, or King's version of trapping a town under the dome in his book Under the Dome. You can say that they have a common grandparent or something, but King makes it so his own. I think Lovecraft makes everything his own too. He is a big convergence point in this. So, did Lovecraft read Fishhead before he wrote Shadows over Innsmouth? Yes. He wrote this before he wrote Shadows over Innsmouth. So, he wrote Fishhead. He wrote about Fishhead in here. So, yes. But, he made this stuff his own. Wikipedia is overstating that when they're talking about Irvin S. Cobb. But I'm very anxious to read Irvin S. Cobb's Fishhead and what was the other one? Unbroken Chain. Proto Lovecraft. Yeah, I'm certainly going to check that out. So now we come to the third section, which confused me because this is chapter 10, this is chapter 9, this is chapter 8. Chapter 7 is Poe, which we're not close to Poe. Poe died in 1849. Poe died in 1849. I'm almost positive. I don't actually have it written down on my notes here. And then it goes back to spectral literature on the continent and writers that were writing up to 1920. So it confused me, but we're going to go over this a bit more. The page numbers are on these as well. Alruan, which I tried to mispronounce or tried to pronounce last time because we had the movie version when we were talking about last time, was written in 1911 by Hans Heinz Ewers. Maurice Level, Grip of Fear 1909, and Those Who Return 1923. I should have talked about 1923 one last time, but I did not. Speaking of 1923, going back to America real quick. Weird Tales. I should have mentioned last time as well. The Weird Tales magazine that Lovecraft wrote for, etc., started publishing in 1923. So this is the basis of what we had there. There's still pulp magazines going on at this time. They started in the late 1890s. But Weird Tales started in 1923, so a lot of these were anthologized or serialized in other places. Gustav Meyrink, The Golem. We saw The Golem in movie form in the last video as well. And of course it's a folklore story as well, but it's canonized, I suppose, by Gustav Meyrink in 1908, about the rabbi who makes a mud monster with the word of God inside of it to protect the Jews in the Prague ghetto. And Ansky wrote the play of the Dybbuk in 1920, or he didn't. He wrote it before that. He died in 1920, and it was performed posthumously. I never know how to pronounce that word. Posthumous. Whatever, you know that word. Whatever, how you pronounce that. Going into what other people were going on. What about Lovecraft? Lovecraft's Juvenilia was about this time. 1909. What do we have here? 1908. The Alchemist. And 1904. The Beast in the Cave. I think that's that's the 1902, some unpublished stuff. The Haunted House, John the Detective. 1902, The Mysterious Ship. And then a bunch of stuff that wasn't published. And he was doing poetry as well during this time. During all times, really. He was a poetry writer. Oh, yeah. I mentioned last time about the really racist-sounding poem. I'm not even going to say the title. It's horrific. I did look it up. Oh my god, it is really racist. Like, Jesus, HP, what the hell? That was during this time as well. I'm not touching that one. That's ridiculous. Yeah, but that was during this time as well. I got nothing, folks. He was definitely a racist guy. There's no denying it. He married a Jewish woman, and he started talking anti-Semitically in front of her. And she had to remind him at points that, hey, I'm a Jew, you know. I got nothing for HP on his. But a product of his time, I guess, is the most generous way of putting it for him. I've mentioned it a couple of times. The biography documentary on Lovecraft, Fear of the Unknown. I think it's still available on YouTube. It's got great people in it. St. Joshi makes a big appearance. Caitlin Kiernan. Neil Gaiman. Ramsey Campbell. On the tip of my tongue. Peter Straub. Thank you. Alright. It's great stuff. I recommend it. It's great. If you're a Lovecraft fan or want to know more about Lovecraft and especially the racism stuff, how weirdly that worked out, yeah, and his marriage, of course. I recommend that video. I recommend a lot of the videos that I mentioned before. I've been having so much fun looking at like a little 11-minute shorts of movies going on from this time, because they're all basically available unless they were burned in the fire or lost in the sands of time. Watch a 50-second movie or a 40-second movie. I can't, when I'm talking about other time periods, I can't actually go out and buy all the movies that I want to talk about and watch them beforehand. I have to sum up or tell you what other people are saying about it. Um, yeah. So, but I've been having a great time watching these little 13-minute, 10-minute, 8-minute movies with weird little camera tricks and demons and dancing girls and odd stuff. It's great. So, I'll probably recommend some more of those next time because we're going to go back to the 1890s and the birth of moving pictures, as well as the books from the 1890s and the stories from the 1890s. And we're still going to be working our way through Shill. Yeah, it's getting a little weird. I'm trying to sift through all this stuff. I thought it was in chronological order. I really did. Oh, there's Poe's 1849. I was right. But it's sort of in chronological order and sort of not. I can deal. So till next time, guys. Have a great night. We're going to continue, of course, with History of Horror. I don't know how we're going to start. 1899 is going to be the end point. I don't know if I'm going to go 25 years or 15 years again. I don't know if I want to go back to the death of Poe, which would be 1850, I guess. That would be 50 years. Maybe 25. Maybe 25 is a short video, or maybe 25 is a long video. I haven't done enough of the research to know. So it'll be a surprise for you. It'll be more hard work for me, but that's alright. So next time will be History of Horror. My name's Drew. Thanks for watching. Horror Analysis. See you next time. Banger. Movie. The reflection comes out of the mirror
and goes and commits crimes while the student is stuck with being blamed for them. 1911, the first full-length horror movie. The 71-minute Dante Inferno. Now, this one is available on YouTube, and I did watch over it. It's kind of cool. Special effects, I mean, they're not, Industrial Light and Magic or anything, but got a bug in here. But special effects are pretty cool for the time. For 1911, I was pretty impressed. It's based on Dante Alighieri's Inferno from the Divine Comedy. Obviously, it's about Dante and Virgil, the Roman poet, going through hell. Virgil escorting Dante through hell. There's a lot of, in all these, there's going to be a lot of overacting, just because there's no subtlety. It's all silent movies, so there's a lot of gesticulating, over-gesticulating. So it's going to happen that a little bit of overacting, but the special effects, there's someone, people dressed as birds, and they had the birds fly up to the tree, on top of a tree, which is cool. I was like, wow, that's neat. I was like, I'm not sure if it's wire work or what happened, but the final scene where the girl is walking along the road in the dream sequence type thing, and the hand. But she was walking backwards, and they filmed it backwards. That's why it's so. That's what's giving you. Your eye sees that it's disjointed, and it gives you the weird things. This is a technique that dates back to 19-something. 1900 or 1809 something. Yeah. It's crazy. When we're going this far back, it's pretty nuts. But anyway, let's talk about what movies are actually going on during this time, or what films, I guess. Um, you're still getting some pretty famous directors that people will know of. In 1914, I'm going to go backwards from 1914 to 1900. Before I do that, let me put this up. It's the same slide, essentially. I just retitled it. As last time, the lists are the same. I'm essentially using the second to last one and the last one pretty extensively, or pretty exclusively, I suppose. For this, for my information, I'm also going on to IMDb and, of course, going on to Wikisource and YouTube to watch the movies. But you can find most of these, the second to last one and the last one. And of course, I'm really impressed with this www.angelfire.com/darkside/realm of horror. It's a she, first off, which is cool anyway, having a female director on this early in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Having a female director is pretty cool. The record that she broke is for having the first movie over the minute mark. That is really weird to me and to pretty much everybody else I've talked to about this. I guess if you're studying old film or something, I guess it's sort of, yeah, of course it has to be, someone has to break the minute mark. And there's a threshold that I didn't even realize was there. Almost all of these are in the public domain, or they're lost to the sands of time. So you can find them and watch them on YouTube or on Wikisource or a number of other sites that I found where these are available. And getting these very odd directors. Very odd directors. George Millet. I'm probably slaughtering his name. George Millet. I'm going to go with that anyway. We'll be going over him in the early ones. Very strange guy. He's the first guy to use fade-ins, fade to blacks, fade from blacks, and what was the other one? I don't know. Stop motion animation was one of his things. The female director was the first one to film things backwards and have the film be played forwards if it's filmed backwards, or vice versa. Which was, of course, used famously in Carrie, the movie Carrie. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Horror Analysis with me, Drew. You caught me. I false started the first video. I started coughing on water because it went down the wrong way. I'm still tearing up. Oh, my goodness. But we're okay. Today we're continuing with History of Horror. And we are back to the beginning of the, well, not even this century, the last century. The 1900 to 1914 is the section we're talking about today. This is a really weird section. This is a really weird time period. Films in general started in 1890s. By 1900, they were barely getting to the, not even to feature full-length rate yet. Obviously, we're still in silent era. The first... In 1911, we get to the first full-length horror movie. I'm not sure what the first full-length movie in general was. But, movies are still in their infancy, very much so. And when we're talking about movies, and when I'm doing research about movies, things are getting weird. Whoops. There we go. It's a bit better adjusted now. Like one of the directors on the list today, was record-setting because /history1.htm. It was a very helpful site for me, so I'm going to recommend it. So, for 1914, two movies that came out. The Ghostbreaker. In the first year of Cecil B. DeMille's career, he directed the Ghostbreaker. Also in that year, let's get rid of that. Also in that year, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, which was a Poe story. So they're still, as soon as they're getting the chance to make the movies of Poe stories, they're doing it. 1913, there's three that are of note. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It was 26 minutes long. It's in the public domain and is available. I'm trying to think of what the guy's name was. King something. Yeah. An 18-minute long, the first filmed werewolf movie called The Werewolf. Unfortunately, that one was lost in a fire, in the studio fire, so that one is not available to anybody. But, supposedly it was the first werewolf movie on film. Also in 1913, we talked about it before, The Student of Prague. In one of my Fission. It's a doppelganger